welcome Carrie Clogg as our moderator for this session. Carrie is a NAMI Iowa board member and the chair of the Advocacy Committee. She's also a community leader and she's a fierce mom to a son with mental health challenges. Carrie is an inspiration to so many of us by openly sharing her family's story. I want to say thank you to Carrie for being here today, and Carrie, you can go ahead and take it over.
Thanks, Nina. I appreciate the introduction and happy Friday to everybody. It really is my pleasure to be moderating today's discussion, a conversation with Iowa stakeholders on if children's mental health system is progressing. It's very near and dear to my heart and something that I believe is very important. Today, I am joined by a wonderful group of panelists. They are Brian Carico, Therapeutic Learning Coordinator, Marissa Eyanson, Division Administrator of Mental Health and Disability Services for the Iowa Department of Human Services, Hingtgen, Chief Executive Officer of Mental Health Disability Services of East Central Region, and Okpara, CEO of Tanager Place. Before we get started, I just want to give a brief introduction on the current state of the children's mental health system in Iowa. And I will be reading this because I don't know all of it off the top of my head. And I want to make sure that we start with an even playing field, if you will. So legislation creating a children's mental health system was passed in 2019 and signed into law by Governor Reynolds, which went into effect July 1st of last year. This was the result of more than 30 years of planning and attempts to create a system, and it was a major policy advancement for the state. Previously, Iowa was only one of 3 states without such a system, and I think we all felt that. The law created a new state children's behavioral health board responsible for overseeing an implementation of the law. And the governor appointed 12 citizen members, including NAMI Iowa Executive Director Peggy Hubbard, who were confirmed by the Senate for 3-year terms earlier this year. Additionally, there are 4 legislators and 4 department heads who are members of this task force. Responsibility for creating the services lies with the 14 MHDS regions, who are governed primarily by county supervisors and funded through the county mental health property tax levy. Although many services are eligible for Medicaid reimbursement, the cost of getting them up and running and paying for residents who don't qualify for Medicaid or have private coverage is borne by the counties. This funding source is inadequate and it's problematic given that it is based on 1996 spending and has 2 different caps on it. We need to have adequate and sustainable funding, ideally a mix of local and state, in order to develop the much needed services. Governor Reynolds unveiled her Invest in Iowa plan in January, which would have used a 1-cent increase in the sales tax to pay for a major state investment in mental health services. The property tax levy would have been maintained at a much lower level to keep counties' skin in the game. The proposal was receiving serious consideration by legislators when COVID hit in March, shutting down the session. When they reconvened in June, Invest in Iowa was off the table, but the governor has said she plans to introduce it again next session. So I want to hear, I've got a series of questions for our panelists, and then we, as Nina mentioned, we will leave the last 15 minutes for Q&A. But the first question I'd like us to discuss, and I'll just kind of go down the line of each panelist to give their thoughts, is how has the pandemic impacted the progress of developing a children's mental health system? And we'll start with Brian, if you don't mind.
Well, thank you. You know, for us within the schools, because that's kind of where my my interest lies and where I'm working, the pandemic has really kind of impacted a lot of things with our kids and with our families, and trying to figure out how best to meet the needs of students that were on our radar or on our lists of needing our support has become very difficult. The distance learning or the online learning or the hybrid learning is, in my opinion, necessary because of the health issues, but it's also been a big impact to our mental health concerns for our kids. I think it also has maybe impacted a little on the fact that teachers are being looked at and educators are being looked at in different ways than we used to be. I think parents with the pandemic and having their kids at home and doing the hybrid and seeing what education looks like firsthand has made the role of the school and the role of the teacher that more important for our students and for our students' mental health. I hear on a continued basis that we got to get kids back because of their mental health. I also hear that we got to get kids back because of the academic, but I think the most that I'm hearing, or the impact that I'm feeling the most about, is the mental health side, which really goes to show what our schools are important for. And I've said this in my 29 years as an educator and 25 years as an administrator. Our schools are more than paper and pencils. And we need to make sure that we are focusing on our students' mental health and supporting those. So the pandemic, I think, has been bad in some situations for education and for this, but I think it's also opened the eyes to the importance in what we really do as educators.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Okpara.
Yeah. For me, and Brian gives that wonderful perspective as an educator. When you look at system planning, what this year has really done is honestly put us all on pause, right? Kind of a collective societal pause. And so where I think there were real opportunities to grow and bring people together, what happened is really in the spring, everybody just sort of stopped and thought, how can we make sure we deliver the services we already have in place? And so there was like a real triage of making sure and making that conversion of teletherapy and teleservices. And so when you think about how a system had to move and be so agile, that's what happened. However, and behind the scenes, things did continue to move, albeit slowly, right? But they did still move, and the regions still were doing work, and professionals were still coming together. But again, we have to remember this is not a common year. And so there was a lot of planning behind the scenes, but really people were really triaging how to make sure we had services in place for this year. And so I think as we look toward the future, we just had a board meeting recently, is trying to think about, okay, what's going to happen next legislative session? That's not necessarily what we're really talking about in the spring, right? That was kind of like everyone sheltering in place, all hands on deck. But this year, I think we're really, as we've lived with this pandemic a little bit and knowing that there is a vaccine, there was promising vaccines, kind of on the horizon, then we have to get everybody vaccinated, that we're able to really kind of see some light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think that it's more encouraging, and I think we're starting to understand more of where our gaps are. But this year was really a year where everybody just sort of hunkered down and said, we just got to make sure we have some base services in place. So this is a tough year, hands down for everybody, parents, teachers, the community partners. And so, and we're in a pretty tough season right now. So, but I have to say people have been, rising to the challenge. But next year, I think we're going to see even further growth and more discussion.
Thank you. Marissa.
Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for having me. So from my perspective, kind of looking out at the statewide efforts, the answer to the question is yes, COVID slowed down our progress. It also shines a light on systemic gaps, right? How we make those connections between the different places in our systems that need to work together in order to best support our kids. We've had some good things that are going to emerge from this, I think. And so while we have to acknowledge that it slowed us down, the expansion of telehealth has been really valuable for us. And it's something that we're honing into in hopes that we can preserve some of the good things that come through all of this. We also were fortunate to be able to utilize those CARES Act dollars and distributed $30 million out to the regions. And they've been so thoughtful and how they've been doing the work to get those dollars out to their providers. We had an additional bucket of money that was distributed through the Medicaid program under the CARES Act as well, really getting directly to our providers that are providing Medicaid services, most of whom are serving our kids. And so, you know, really looking for those places that we've been creative, looking to maintain them going forward, and also making sure that, I mean, kind of as Okpara was just sharing, we have to make sure that our system itself survives and thrives on the other side of COVID.
Absolutely. Thank you. And May.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Carrie. I would add on to everything that everyone else has said. I think that kind of like springboarding from what Okpara said and our need to hunker down, I really feel like the pandemic since March has been a distraction for us in the development of children's services. First of all, we have, as the Mental Health and Disability Services region, our focus has been on supporting our providers to make sure our providers stay healthy and to stay whole and are able to provide the services that they provide best to the people that they support. Certainly, as we all know, the pandemic has an impact on workforce, whether it is people who have been ill and other people having to do overtime, or people who have been laid off in certain sectors, people who have been too fearful to come to work. And so just the workforce instability for our providers has been a big concern and a big distraction for us. The other thing too is just implementing from our standpoint, policy and funding, implementing everything that we've needed to implement has taken our attention away from what we'd really like to be doing, you know, and working on that service development for those services that we're planning for next year. And we're maybe, in my mind, we're a couple months behind on that. We have progress and we're making way, and I think we still have enough time, but I wish that we would have been, you know, at the point we're at right now, maybe 2 months ago, but we were just dealing with everything from the pandemic. So when we start talking about that service development, but I also think that the pandemic has created a spotlight for us to see the significance and the value of prevention and education services. So we, as Marissa said, you know, we have been able to utilize the CARES Act dollars to do that. And what we had, the small little pot that we had for prevention and education, back in February when we budgeted for the region, you know, for FY21, that pot, we were able to use the CARES Act dollars to really expand that pot and to be able to use those dollars in a way that created prevention, education, as well as treatment, but a lot of education that we're trying to do to not only to help children, you know, with our partnerships with the schools, but projects that we've done to help families and to support families in that ever shifting environment that's happening right now between managing their own work and the demands of their own work, yet supporting their children in virtual or a hybrid learning type situation. So I think that has, for us to understand that telehealth or online learning is for the foreseeable future going to be our reality. It has helped us to say, okay, the importance of prevention and education is there as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Going into our next question, as we do develop this system, how do we address stigmas that keep people from getting care for their children? Okpara, would you like to start?
Yeah, I actually think this has been an area that's actually been a lot of success with. I think the Make It Okay campaign, you know, NAMI's efforts, I think, have been really instrumental. I also think that one of the things that happened early on in the pandemic, right, as you talk about some of the positives that come out of the pandemic, is it's not just about children. Everyone really discovered, as we're in isolation and how we need human contact, people started to understand more about mental health and started to talk more about it. More virtual support groups started to happen. So I think we've made a lot of progress on stigma. And I think that some of the efforts that have been taken statewide is just going to continue to sort of move that ball down the field. I think though one of the things that is really important is also sort of related to that is making sure we're bringing in parental voice, especially for those of us who work with kids, to talk about the impact that this is having on their children, and also so that they know that there are others out there who are in the same situation, and that they do have support. And I think that's one of the things that we can always continue to improve on in the work. But I do think there's been some great anti-stigma, stigma reducing efforts across the state.
Yeah, I would agree. And, you know, as a mother of a son who has an anxiety disorder, I tell people this whole pandemic both provided comfort for him because he likes to isolate, but it has also amped his anxiety up about 400 notches. So we deal with different challenges and ups and downs every day.
Yeah.
But he's not alone, as kids who had not, you know, suffered anxiety before are now having new anxieties around living through this pandemic. Let's go to Marissa.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, just kind of thinking and kind of bouncing off of what Okpara was just saying as well. You know, we've been trying to put forth efforts from the DHS space, utilizing some of the FEMA dollars, for instance, in COVID recovery, Iowa. It's an awareness campaign, right? Getting the word out that there's support and it's available to everyone, and we did that on purpose. We want everyone to know that everybody can access these resources, and everybody needs support sometimes. You know, this is a team sport. When we talk about reducing stigma, it won't be one of us having a grand conversation and it just is fixed. It's all of us having repeated conversations over and over and over again. We're making a concentrated effort here at DHS to hire people with lived experience, and we know that is an important piece of work that we need to do. We've changed how we post vacancies in our work to try to bring people into the DHS side. And the reason that it's important is because the work we do here is so heavily in policy. And when folks are setting policy, they benefit from being able to work with team members with lived experience that might say to them, well, that policy would mean this to me, or might understand what it's like to live, of course, with the policies that we set from a macro level. So, you know, we're trying to do the work that we can do here. We're trying to have the conversations, and we're trying to work with our partners because it's a team sport.
Thank you. Let's go to Meg.
So speaking of team sport, I just had this morning, and we are very excited. As Carrie, you said earlier, the 14 mental health and disability services regions in the state of Iowa, we are currently partnering together in a way that we've never done before to create a stigma reduction campaign to end the stigma around brain health issues. And as Okpara said, you were leveraging the momentum of Make It Okay, and we're using different language, but more importantly than that, we are putting out something that will be statewide instead of something that's just in my area of the state or a different area of the state. It's going to be consistent messaging across the entire state of Iowa that all 14 regions are 100% philosophically behind, and we're really excited about that. And not only the messaging and the language is resources and connecting people to resources. So we're going to be having a micro website that will connect people, that people can put in their address, and then they can find local brain health resources for them. So for them or for their children, you know, just being able to just at maybe 3 clicks to be able to get information right away about where help and support is available. So I think that the pandemic, as Okpara said too, is highlighted for us the need, and as you said, Carrie, for your son to be able to say, oh, like, I get this now, and everyone else is feeling this. I had a friend of mine way at the beginning of the pandemic tell me that she felt this was okay because it normalized what she had been feeling for so many years. And she said, and now there are so many other people who feel what I feel. And so it's helping to normalize it. So try as we might always to find silver linings and opportunities to the pandemic, that it has helped people it has normalized the concept of just needing support. And this is a great time for us to make sure that we get that message out, that support is available.
Thank you so much. Brian.
As far as the pandemic piece of that is concerned, I think, like I said earlier, schools and the community are realizing the importance of what schools do and the importance of having a good training for our teachers, having the opportunities, the interventions. So that piece I think has been good. Another couple of things that's happened in the past couple of years, the Senate File 2113 that's required all teachers to be trained, put into our schools the emphasis of our teachers being better trained and better, more aware of the gatekeeper on trauma and of suicide prevention, which I think opened the eyes of our educators to say that this really is a situation that we need to be concerned about, because we started talking about it more. You know, when you think about it, there's 1 out of 5 students sitting in every classroom that has a mental health disorder. And when we start thinking about the impact that has on our schools, you know, the worst case scenario is the loss of a student to suicide. But when you think about that impact that we have in all of our kids that are suffering and sitting in our classes silently, the decreased academic achievement, the disconnect, the dropout rate, the incarceration rate, all of that has a tie to mental health. So once we start talking about that in the schools and making it that we need to train for, and we need to recognize, and we need to be able to support, I think that's also reduced the stigma to say that, you know what, we're an important piece in this whole process. Education is where, you know, the majority of our kids are identified that have mental health needs. You know, it's either in the school classroom or it's with the pediatrician. And so we as a school district, or we as a school system, have made a great leap in providing and recognizing. The other thing that I think has come out of this is the increase in social emotional learning curriculums for our schools. I think, the character counts of years past of talking about, good character, the fairness, citizenship, and all of that was awesome. And, I was a big proponent of that. But I think what it's done now is we've broadened out from just being good citizens to having a better look at what mental health looks like, and increases the knowledge of our kids that, doing a mental health checkup is just as important as doing a physical checkup. In state law, all 9th graders have to have a dental checkup before they can come to school. But we don't require anything with mental health. And I think that's slowly being looked at, and it is a plus. The other thing that I think has been huge is our nonprofits that have developed to support schools. And one in particular, Please Pass the Love, is a nonprofit that I think has just been remarkable in helping schools and helping reduce that stigma.
I couldn't agree more. I think, it's more normalized, if you will, among peers to say, I'm not okay, or I need some support. That it's come a long ways in just a couple of years. So I am hopeful for that. Our next question is, one of the initial recommendations from the Children's Board was universal screening. What are your thoughts on universal screening for mental health? And let's go to May first.
Thank you, Carrie. So I think the concept of universal screening, two thoughts that I have with that. First of all, I think we need to do some education across our systems about the difference between universal screening and assessment. Because as we've been working on this topic in the last few years, I've just noticed there's a lot of confusion about screening versus assessment, and people having concerns about right to information and those types of training and the tool and those. So a screening tool can be easily implemented, can be done with a minimal amount of training, and it really just helps to shed some light on whether or not, do we need to dig a little bit deeper with this child to do an assessment, right? So one before the other. So I think that we need to have a greater understanding in our state around that topic. And then as well, I think it's really critical as we continue to move forward with the State Behavioral Health Board's recommendation about a universal screening, that we ensure that we're working with all sectors who support children, right, across from schools who are crucial partners to MHDS systems and providers. I know that there have been some school districts who have wanted to move forward with universal screening for years, and so there's maybe pockets of implementation across the state. And I think it would serve us better if we had a universal screener that was universally implemented across the state and across those systems.
Thank you. Let's go to Okpara.
Yeah, okay, so this is one that drives us all a little crazy. I gotta be honest. This is one that on the surface you think, oh my God, we could just knock this out, right away. And so this is one that has lagged, and I think it has caused frustration. We talked about it at the board, and so one of the good things about the board is that we are able, I should say, everyone, able to express when we have frustration or disagreements, and it's not personalized, and so we can really talk about it. And I think there's been a great subgroup who worked at the board level to try to move this along. What we came into is like a little bit of what May was saying. It's like there are different pockets of how people feel about where you do it, how you do it. One of the things that we all agreed on is that a screening tool is meaningless if there's not follow-up and there's actually services for kids who are identified to get. So you can't have the cart without the horse, right? So and so that's one of the challenges, and that led to a discussion about gaps in the system. And so, because again, when we think about the state, sometimes we always talk about the most populated areas, and we sometimes don't necessarily talk about the places that are less populated, that have less, I think last year someone called it a service desert. And so, what's a screening tool going to do for families and for young people if there's no services? And so it's very much tied together. I do think, though, it was one of my little personal frustrations, it has moved much further along. And again, as a real partnership, and that the school systems and the AEAs and professionals are really trying to come together and decide on some tools that make sense. So I am more encouraged now, especially after our last board meeting, that we are really, this is something that we're going to be able to launch here relatively soon. But it is really the cornerstone. That's like recommendation number one. Is really the cornerstone of the whole effort. So, but again, I just want to remind people, screening without proper diagnosis, treatment, and services, it won't make much difference.
Yeah, agreed. Let's go to Brian.
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. It's funny that you asked that, because that's exactly what I was working on today. In Ames, we are creating a screening. We're going to do a screening in the spring, hopefully. We have to make a presentation to the board in January, but that's what I was working on today, to try to develop that screening and the protocols for our screening. But I totally believe and agree with Okpara, is if we screen, what do we do? And I think that's been the difficulty for a lot of schools, to say, you know what, yes, we want to screen, but if we screen and we don't have the resources to support that, then we're really doing a disservice to our kids, and we're putting ourselves in a bad situation. I think that's changing a little bit. And I think, with hearing that there's a look for a universal screening for the entire state would be amazing, because right now, there's different schools that do different things. But the importance of screening for a school looks at so many different aspects. It's the allocation of resources, it's the interventions, it's the MTSS for tiers of intervention, 1 and 2 levels of intervention. And what do we do universally for our students? The screening is great to pick out those kids that have a mental health concern, because like I said, 1 out of 5 have them. But it also does a lot to reduce that stigma that we talked about earlier. Because when kids get to be screened and they see that their screening shows that they have a typical to a normal range, it allows that discussion to say the importance of continuing that screening. So there are so many aspects that I think screenings can help schools and provide for our students to really make a difference. When like I said before, you know, the dentist, and I sorry I keep referring back to that, but it really bothers me that, you know, the state of Iowa said that all kids have to have a dental screening to go to school, but they don't check on their mental health. Well, with that universal screening, that would open that up, and that would give us a lot more information about our students that are doing well, and how do we support those strengths that they do have, but also to plan and to program and to provide funding and resources for those that aren't.
Thank you. Marissa.
Yeah, really great thoughts from everybody. You know, a couple of things that I thought of listening to other folks along the way is, you know, you have to start somewhere. So one thing that we have done here in Iowa is that we require managed care organizations, which are the bulk of our Medicaid population here in Iowa, to conduct health risk assessments. And part of the health risk assessment is that they do what's called a PHQ-9, a patient health questionnaire. It's a simple 2-question identifier for folks who might have depression. And children, of course, are part of our managed care population, just like adults are. You know, it's not everything. It's not universal. It doesn't catch everyone and it doesn't catch everything, but it's a starting line of something that we've been able to do and move forward. This is forever work. And part of it is taking the little bits and pieces that we've been able to put together and move forward and continue to move them forward. Behavioral health ultimately is public health. And I think that's the point that Brian is making, that as a state, I think we're continuing to move into a direction that says that there is a universal screen for kiddos. And maybe it does tie to, you know, entry into 5th grade or something of the sort. None of that's been determined, but it seems directional, I think, at this time that might be the space that we're headed toward.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question, what do you think needs to happen in the next 2 years to move Iowa forward? Let's go to Brian first.
Great question. One of the things, and you know, I really appreciate the fact that we have this, the committee, the Children's Mental Health Committee, and you know, the appointment of it by the state shows that there's a need and an interest in support. But the one thing that I do know is the lack of educators that are a part of that committee. I tried to petition a little bit to get some more voices from the educator side of things onto that. And I met a little bit of a roadblock in the fact that, you know, they said, yeah, it's set and we're where we need to be. And I think the people that are on there are excellent people, and I'm not downgrading their abilities in any matter. But when you want to take a look at the universal, when you want to take a look at what is good for all kids, I think the schools need a bigger voice in that committee, for one. The other thing that I think that we really need to start focusing on for the next 2 years is the trauma-sensitive schools. We need to take a look at our practices. Again, when we look at what's good for trauma-sensitive schools, those practices, those strategies, all of that is very important and useful for any kid. But it really focuses down for the kids that we miss, or the kids that are falling through the cracks silently, because we haven't trained our teachers in how to observe and how to interact with that. Just ironic that my daughter is just going to graduate this Saturday from UNI with a family service degree, and she's working at Orchard Place. And she was working with some kids just the other day, and she just told me this story this afternoon, so that's why it's sitting with me. She says, you know, Dad, all of those things that I learned through a role play that I hated doing in class is the exact things that I was doing with my students or with my kids at work last night. And I thought, oh, how ironic, you know? Why not train our people? Why not give that? Why not make that a part of our teacher education programs? Why not put that into our studies in our universities and really focus on the betterment of the trauma-sensitive schools and what we can do to make those impacts more effective for our kids? You know, that's the piece that I think that we can really improve in our schools on.
Thank you. May.
Well, I think we have a lot of work to do in the next 2 years. Sorry, I'm losing my earpiece here. My priority is what I talked about before, is the financial and the workforce stability for our providers. I've said it with adult services as well as children's services. I don't feel comfortable asking the providers in our region to move forward and take the risk of developing new services until I feel that they feel that they're comfortable financially and workforce. It's too hard, you know. So I think we need some concentrated effort, whether that be, you know, on the behalf of regions, on the behalf of providers, on the behalf of the department and the legislator, to ensure in the next year, especially because of the pandemic, that we are supporting the providers in order for them to feel stable enough to grow. We certainly want to move forward with children's services, and we want to be innovative in Iowa and the things that we can do. So I think we need to, once we ensure that workforce and that financial stability, of course, we have requirements that are written to us in code, but I've challenged my team to look at what is required in the law, but also what are, I really kind of challenged my team to look at nationally, what are some great evidence-based practices that we will meet the letter of the law, absolutely, but what could we go beyond, and how could we be innovative to make sure that we're supporting children in a way that not only addresses their current brain health concerns, but creates that prevention and education so that those concerns are addressed much earlier in life, are acknowledged. Let me start with that, are acknowledged and addressed much earlier in life, so that hopefully we can have the prevention of greater need when they become adults. So, you know, the developmental period of children is very, very important. And for us to be able to focus on that in order to create a healthier overall culture in our state is really important. So, immediate and long-term ideas there, but first of all, we want to focus on shoring up stability across our state.
Perfect, thank you. Let's go to Marissa.
Yeah, you know, when I look ahead to the next couple of years, one of the things I think about, and it's kind of related to the conversation we were having about screening, is that sometimes as we think about screening and we think about assessment, the next question becomes, then what? What we need to take on is some effort in systemic mapping here in Iowa. We need a better understanding of where services are available and where they're not. We need to understand the gaps so we can address them. It speaks to a bit of what May is talking about as well. You know, when we charge our regions with the development of services, it can be complex to develop services in kind of an unknown vacuum. So, you know, statewide system mapping is going to be an important part of how we go forward. We need to know what's available for kids. You know, the other thing that I think of is I think about the alignment of our work with our partners over at public health. Behavioral health is public health, and the alignment of how that work goes forward and how we better leverage resources between two very large statewide departments and bring that work together and look at a health and human services space is going to, I think, really enable us to get to some of those prevention spaces and really bring together the whole spectrum of care. So I look ahead to the next couple of years and I think that it's exciting. It's a lot of work. It's important work, but I think it's exciting.
Thank you. Okpara.
Yeah, I mean, I would not disagree with any of the other panelists. I think, you know, I'm going to add a little heavy dose of realism here. We also need to keep this conversation at the forefront, right? For many years, you know, we said in that first go round of this board, and people said, oh my God, we've been trying to do this for 30 years and we couldn't get it. We have to keep this momentum forward. That means we need to continue to listen to voices. People need to continue to hold legislators accountable. They need to hold us accountable. We need to make sure that this continues to be an important part of what we say we want to do to build the best state we can to help kids be healthy. I echo what May said about the financial situation. You know, again, this is a major issue, and we need to figure out to be able to fund services in all parts of our state. Again, in all parts of our state, so that there are no real service deserts. That's just unacceptable, you know, to me. And, you know, and I think that we have to stop siloing, right? And we have to continue to break down silos and work cross departments and work, you know, cross providers and to say, look, we have to build this, you know, together. And so Those are all really important pieces. And I also think that the conversation that's already begun is to look at, we have major gaps for some of the most challenged kids in the state, and that we are not necessarily doing the best services we can for those kids. And how do we go about addressing those needs too? Because those kids are not finding success in some of our programs. They're not finding success in school. Some of these kids wind up getting sent out of state. We've got to also figure out how to help some of our kids who are having the most challenges. And so really identifying where we have gaps in what we do right now, and really start to build up the capacity and the resources within the state over the next couple of years. And so, again, I have to say, just as a board member, being around the table with so many different viewpoints, I think we all are really getting to a place where we're agreeing, like, hey, we've got to start knocking these things out together. And so that wasn't necessarily like that the first go around, because I think we're all figuring out what we were doing, and trying to get the board solidified in code. But I think we're in a different place now. And I just want to encourage, because I see we have like 113 participants. These meetings are public. They're in Zoom. There's always a public comment section. Peggy is pushing to make sure we have a parent panel next time. We need to hear from you. So please, please, please use your voice. That is the most important thing that can be a catalyst for making sure this does not fall by the wayside, that all the regions get what they need, the legislators have support as they go and battle around these things, the DHS has what they need. And so your support in helping push this forward is going to make a huge difference. So I just want to encourage people to please use their voice, and to continue to hold all of us accountable to what we're supposed to be doing to make the lives of children better.
That awesome statement. I sometimes get asked, why do you keep telling your story? And although my son has great care and is doing wonderful, I'm going to keep telling this story until all kids are doing wonderful and have the resources they need, because then there's still work to do for sure. Well, I see there's about 9 questions in the Q&A section. So I think what we'll do with that is, instead of we'll never get to all 9 questions if all panelists answer. So I'll ask the question, and panelists, if you just want to kind of raise your hand if you have an answer to that question, and we'll go from there. So the first question came in: what can we at the local level do to provide for the mental health of our pre-K through 12 school teachers and provide support for them during this time? May.
I'd love to talk about that one. So I want to talk about something that we've done in the East Central region, but also to point out that we are not unique, that other regions have done this as well. So I don't know in all 14 if this is available, but I do know in many regions across the state it's available. The very first RFP and the very first project that we implemented with our CARES Act dollars was what we call mental well-being support for school staff. So we began in, let's see, August 1st, we issued the RFP and we signed a contract August 6th. So we turned it around really quickly. And what we did is we had a collaboration. It was beautiful how it worked out. We have a collaboration between our 2 community mental health centers in our region, Abbey Health and Hillcrest Family Services, because between the 2 of them, they could cover all of our 9 counties. And they, in early August, began providing 3 what we're calling mental wellness coaching sessions to any person who works for a school district. So it's not just teachers, because bus drivers and cafeteria workers and those frontline secretaries, when a parent walks in or students walk in and they're the first contact, everyone was suffering from anxiety about coming back into school after having 4 or 5 months off. And just the anxiety of exposure and what was this school year going to bring. So 3 mental wellness coaching sessions are available to any school staff person in our region that give them some general tips on dealing with anxiety, sleeplessness, worry, and those types of things about the anxiety regarding the pandemic. And then if the 3 wellness coaching sessions aren't meeting their need, then they're eligible for 2 individualized outpatient therapy sessions. So this was something that we really prioritized to do first, to get it in line, because my view was that if we can support teachers and teachers feel more comfortable in their coping skills and their ways that they're handling the stress of the pandemic, then they'll be more valuable to the children who are in their classrooms. So like I said, it was something that we implemented really, really quickly. We have added other population groups now to that contract, and other regions have followed too. So across the state, check if you're an educator, check to see if that's available in your area as well, because and I know Marissa's probably going to talk about COVID, that resource, the one that she's going to talk about, and there are lots of other ones out there, but it was a project that we very intentionally created to support teachers, because I know teachers and all school staff, because I know how stressful it was and continues to be. Like I said earlier, workforce, the work world and school are just unstable right now. A lot of schools have made the decision to temporarily go virtual between Thanksgiving or Christmas, or maybe for just a week after Thanksgiving. There's a lot of shifting that's going on, and that creates more stress and that creates more anxiety. So those services are still available in many parts of the state.
Any other panelists want to, Marissa, you have things to add?
May is right. I was just going to give the reminder to folks about COVID Recovery Iowa. And it's easy to find, covidrecoveryiowa.org. Folks can go to the website, they enter their name and a telephone number, and a counselor will call them back. It's able to do a couple of things. It's able to offer some support to people across the spectrum of whatever that support might look like. And it's also able to do referral for folks who need more support than they're able to provide through the COVID Recovery Iowa program. So I just encourage folks that haven't taken a look at it yet to get out and take a look at that website. It's an easy one to remember. Hopefully, we tried to make it easy to remember. And we really want folks using it because we know how important it is that we get that outreach out to everybody.
I guess the only thing that I would say is what Okpara said earlier about holding that board accountable and holding the people that are serving accountable. I think that's the same at our local level. Our local school boards have a lot of influence and they have a lot of decision-making power on what we do to support and how do we support our teachers. And they need to hear that. They need to hear that our teachers are struggling. They need to hear that our kids are struggling, and we need to make sure that that doesn't get pushed aside to academic, achievement or standards or whatever at this point. Our students don't learn if they don't have a good mental health. And our boards need to realize that. And that's one thing that I would say for the local side of things is let them know that our teachers need our support.
Hey, Carrie, you're muted.
Thank you, Nina. I'm going to go to a question specifically. I'm going to jump around on the questions a little bit about the board. Do board members participate in national conferences or any other resources to learn from other states, many of which have statewide systems of care and are way ahead of us? Okpara, can you maybe answer that?
Yeah, I actually don't know everything else that everyone attends because it's an interdisciplinary board, so we all kind of come from different parts of the work. I think I attend a lot of stuff and sit on a lot of other boards and bring that national perspective in. I want to give Director Garcia a little bit of credit too, because we do run DHS over the coals sometime at these meetings. I know I do anyway. But one of the things that we did, and when she first took over, is ask to bring some data in from other states. In particular, some things we were looking at. And so I do think there's a more, I'm not sure how many people are going out or attending things virtually, but data is coming in as well. And also there are a lot of advocacy groups that send things to the board to make us aware of it and things that they're also pulling. And so all those things factor into those conversations. And so I would tell people, please continue to do that because we do read them all. And that's so that data is coming in from other parts of the country and saying, look, this is what other states are doing, and this is what the models are. And I know DHS has been doing a really good job of also bringing that in as well. And so again, I cannot stress enough. I can be pretty tough on the group sometimes, but I do think there's a different level of communication and trying to find solutions. And so it has definitely felt very different, this as we restarted. So, Marissa, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that too. You've come and presented a few things as well.
Sure. I mean, a couple of thoughts that I had about that, and we haven't been quite raked over the coals, but the questions have been hard sometimes, and that's appropriate, right? And so one of the things that we do at the DHS side is we do make connections at the national level with our colleagues in other states. The role that I serve for DHS serves a dual role for us as a state. I'm our state director for IDD services, and I'm also our state mental health authority. And that means that I have a group of colleagues who are the state mental health authorities within their own states, or the state IDD directors. And I reach out to those colleagues, and just this week I was part of a conference at the national level where we pull in that information from other states. So when we get asked the hard questions, Iowa's a small state. On our own, we may not have the resources, right? But we can reach out across the country to find those resources. So kind of to Okpara's point, although the board itself may not be like all together participating in a single conference, each of the board members brings that sort of expertise back to the board, sometimes asking tough questions of us, sometimes asking tough questions of the Department of Education. It is a co-chaired board. And sometimes within the expertise of the board themselves, we're able to address those things. So we've been working hard, I think, to bring those data feeds back in and to look out for other models that are ahead of us. I mean, that's fair.
Thank you. I'm going to go, there's a couple of questions on outcomes, and I want to pull this question out. How can we move the system to focus on outcomes and the use of evidence-based interventions as well as access to services?
You know, the first thing I think of when I think about that, and Okpara might have additional thoughts about this as well, is thinking back again of our Children's State Board, who really are charged with building out a system of care. They have a subcommittee that's focused specifically on metrics and outcomes for exactly this reason. In order to build out a system that's effective, we have to have metrics to help us guide the system, and we have to be focused on the outcomes that we're creating. Otherwise, we're just kind of continuing to build services and not truly building a system. So that's work that has been purposefully taken on by the board. I think it can be difficult sometimes in these processes because we all want these things right now. You know, there's I think it's in part of Cantor, there's the idea that the beginning of any change is exciting and the end is satisfying and the middle is a slog. This is a slog. That's where we're at right now. And so we kind of have to keep our eyes on the prize. But part of that prize is we need a data-driven system that delivers outcomes for Iowa's kids and families.
Yeah, I would just echo that. That was a big discussion, really right before the meeting we had right before COVID hit. You know, and that it was like, okay, are we really measuring the things we want to measure? And so again, you have a lot of different ideas, right, to bring that to the table. And sometimes I feel sorry for that subcommittee because you're trying to really take a lot of ideas and come to some agreement. But they've moved that ball down the field a little bit. And so again, there's people, like I know I had some of my team members who they live in that world, participate. And so it's not necessarily people on the board too, I should say that. We also have other people who work with us, other professionals who also have these different interests, participate in these subcommittees. And so the goal is to have people who are the closest to the work helping develop what we're doing. And so I actually think this is an area I think that I've been very frustrated with, but I feel like we're really getting there, and they really have worked through a lot and bringing ideas back and surveying but again, it's progress can be slower, but it's still progress, right? And so I think that people are trying to get it right and not just trying to rush something out. And so I do think that there have been a lot of good efforts. And so so again, I'm not sure if the subcommittee meetings are public or not, but I'm sure we can always have a report of their work during our board meetings to make available to the public.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a quick question on going back to screening and assessment. Patty asks, who would be qualified to do these screenings and assessments? What role would the AEA staff play in this process? And would students with mental health concerns have an IEP?
I can kind of address some of that with what we've done in the past. When I was in a previous school district, we used the teen screen. And in that screening, we did include our AEA social workers and our AEA psychologists to help us with the clinical and the debriefing. in the process that we're doing right now and planning for Ames's screening, we have utilized the Heartland AEA to help us plan, help us look at how we're going to implement it, and then be the people who do our debriefing or clinicians to work with the kids or to screen further the kids that score in an area of concern. I think the people that, at least for us and what I've observed, is the school-based mental health therapists that have come into schools have often provided the clinician work for us also. I know with Ames, we're working with Central Iowa Psychological Services, and they have agreed to be one of our clinicians that come in when we do our screening. So we have a mental health provider there that can really look at and can help us with that. One of the things that I want to, we tell teachers and we tell counselors all the time is that we are there to help them provide or find the resources, because we're not trained. If as much as advocacy work as I do and as passionate as I am about mental health for our kids, I am nowhere trained to be able to be a counselor or a provider. But if we know the gatekeeping roles and we know the processes and we know where we can go get resources, I think that's our role, and that's where the AEAs will step up and really help us. The AEAs have also increased their trainings that they provide for our schools and for our teachers in mental health trainings. So, now as far as the IEP concerned, that gets into a whole sticky question. Is mental health a learning disability, or is it mental health, so I think what we have to do there is we have to take a look at the overall student itself. And I don't think you can make a blanket statement that says that because if a kid has depression, they need an IEP. But I think you can also make sure that you look at what services you have in your school. What do you have for a tier 1 intervention, universal, and then a tier 2 and a tier 3, as far as how do we support and provide interventions for those students. And then when you get down to where you need to bring in a team to create an IEP, you've tried those interventions. And then at this point, we know, yes, it's impacting the education to a point that we need to do something different and provide individual services for.
Great answer. Any other thoughts on that question? Then I probably have time for maybe one more. This is kind of interesting. What resources are offered to our students and families who don't necessarily speak English as a first language? And do we offer those services?
I know through the schools that that's difficult for us. It's also difficult sometimes to find a provider or a school-based mental health therapist that has the skills, or has not the skills, but the language acquisition skills to support. So that is something that is difficult for schools. I do know that some of your larger urban schools have the use of interpreters and that sort of thing. But trying to find interpreters or find people that can do that work in some of our rural settings is a true obstacle to providing good mental health services.
Thank you. We've got about 1 minute left. Is there any final thoughts that any of the panelists would like to provide in like 10, 15 seconds or less?
No, the only thing I would just say, I hope that people who joined get involved, join NAMI. It's a wonderful organization. I got to give a big shout out. You have a wonderful executive director. Peggy is an advocate, but please use your voice. And again, you have more power to help drive this system. And so please do so.
I'll make a quick plug for the NAMI Iowa Advocacy Committee. We do, it's not just a board committee, it's part of our board, but we take people from anywhere